Hello everyone, my name is Atul Mishra and welcome to Study Capital YouTube platform. So in the last video that you might have received from Shivam sir, he was talking about UGC NET English syllabus. So in this video I will explore a little bit more other things that he might have missed, and I'll talk about the questions that they may ask you in your examination. Okay, so I'll be taking the same approach, talking about the same units. I'll explain a little bit and I'll also mention what kind of questions that you may they may ask you in your examination. So he has already talked about how there will be 150 questions, 50 from the part 1 and 100 from the mainstream, from the domain itself. So I'll be explaining a little bit about all those things. First, as we know, when we talk about literature in general, we talk about British English literature, we talk about Indian literature, American literature, Canadian literature, so on and so forth. But from last few years they have changed the pattern of the syllabus itself, right? So they'll just say drama. So anything can be a drama, right? Shivam sir asked you to look at the dictionary and see what entails in drama. So everything that can be considered as a drama can be a part of your syllabus. That is what he has mentioned. But when you will see the syllabus, you will find they have mentioned classical Greek drama, Elizabethan drama, Restoration drama, modern drama, and so on and so forth. So when you think about drama, it all begins from liturgical plays, and then there is mystery play, morality play, miracle plays, interludes. You enter into Renaissance drama, you enter into the Restoration drama, the decline of drama, the emergence of novel, then again the modern drama, postmodern drama, epic theatre, and then absurd theatre, so on and so forth. There's a great list of writers associated with it. There's a great list of types associated with the drama. All that is something that we have to cover in your examination. Now I'll be basically in this video I'll be talking about questions that they may ask you in your examination. So when you read drama, for example, the very first thing that when we read literature, when we say English literature, most of the times we are thinking about British literature, right? So that is how they have also incorporated these things in your syllabus. So when they mention about the classical Greek drama, so writers like there is comedy, there is tragedy in general, and then you have so many writers associated with comedy genre. It started with very early. For example, if you think of tragedy, you think of Sophocles, and then when you think of for example, Euripides is there, Aristophanes is there in terms of comedy. So there's a great list of writers associated with it in the classical Greek literature, and they have asked in your examination questions such as not very basic questions that who has written which text, but also from the text. And that is when they're not asking direct questions, if you'll remember the minute details that are available related to the Greek drama, although we have very less amount of text available at this moment, but if you know the context, the thematical aspect of it, the way these writers are writing, it will help you to in a way change and eliminate few options in your exam. So that is why this unit, which seems very odd to read because it's very difficult to read as well at the same time, so basic information related to that is also very important. So it all begins from here. We know that liturgical drama, miracle, mystery, it's all part of the till the age of darkness. But when we reach to Elizabethan drama, there is a university wits, there is Shakespeare, and that is the beginning of the real drama that I am basically talking about in this video. So in the last 5 years they have changed their approach a little bit. We don't find many questions from, for example, university wits, from Marlowe, from Lilly, from Lodge and other these writers, but you still find few questions from Shakespeare. So Shakespeare writing in from 1564 to 1616, that is the time frame of Shakespeare. He started his career around 1590s, and we know how he first wrote histories. Then there was a period of great tragedies, and then the period of the great comedies in Shakespeare itself, and they are still asking questions from there. So for example, the chronology part within the text, the characters, the how we can associate with them to the new theories that are emerging these days. So what Shakespeare said, mentioned in his writings in the earliest 17th century, in the beginning of, for example, 1600, 1605, 1607, 1610, when at the end of his career when he wrote plays like Tempest and others. Now we have retellings of those texts. We have poems, replies to those texts. For example, short story. Shivam sir might have talked about the the genre of short stories there. We have Margaret Atwood, who has written a short story on, for example, Hamlet. Gertrude Writes Back. This is the name of the short story. They have also asked in one of the very famous competitive exam, right? So what is happening right now is you don't only need to remember what Shakespeare has written, what he has written, but also what contemporary writers are talking about Shakespeare and how they are replying to it, right? So that is also a very important question that you have to remember. There's a great list of writers associated with it. We will be talking about writers associated with Restoration drama, for example, or for example, writing during the Elizabethan period, how there was a decline after the Elizabethan period, then the role of Ben Jonson, how his plays were written, right? Comedy of manners, comedy of humors. You might be knowing about all these things, and you may take it as very easy because you read it in your syllabus as well. There are few other things that are important when it comes to NET, right? So this is one thing. Then we have Restoration drama, people like Congreve and others who were writing during the time frame. Etheridge is there, right? So very famous question that is related to how, you know, for example, in the matching itself, when I appeared in the NET examination in 2022, long back, I remember from question number 62 to question number 77, all questions were related to matching. They have asked questions related to Restoration drama. They have also asked questions related to, you know, in one lane there will be, you know, name of the characters. In other side, you will have name of the text, or for example, the writer itself. So that simply means that you need to go engage with it as practically as possible. You need to know about the text, but you also need to know about the approach with which you will be taking these texts as well, right? That is what we will be covering in our classes. Modern drama is there, very important, especially when we enter into 20th century. You know, decade wise we can see the transformation. So for example, modern drama, right? So the development that is taking place, the impact of the war, the psychoanalysis part was there, right? 1900, a very important year view. Why? Because Interpretation of Dreams was published there, right? So the role of literary theory alongside it is also important. But in this unit, drama, so mainly major important writers associated with the drama, how they are writing, types of drama, you know, writers associated with that type of drama. For example, there was one question related to absurd drama. So you'll be given names of the writers, and they'll ask you to eliminate one who is not part of that kind of drama writing, right? So one aspect of that thing. Now another unit that Shivam sir has talked about is poetry. You know, it's its oldest genre. So we have poetry from, you know, when we think about literature, the very basic thing that we can think of is poetry. One habit that I will ask you to add is read few poems every day. So you have poetry foundation. Think about, like for example, if you are feeling like despair, if you are feeling like hope, there is something you know, love, any kind of, you know, feeling that you have at any particular time. If you have time, search that unit, you know, write down that feeling as well as, you know, poetry foundation into it, and you will find there are so many poems available online. So poetry foundation is actually a magazine that was started by T.S. Eliot in 1912, and now it's a part of poetry foundation. And you read, I hope you are if you're a literature student, you might be knowing about the poetry foundation. Now Shivam sir has talked about how there is a development that has took place, and what you know, whatever is part of poetry is something that we have to read. Now when we think about literature in general, we read about writers. For example, there is Chaucer in the very beginning, then there is T.S. Eliot in the modernism, right? Now when we read about these writers, for example, for CUET exam or for any other examination, there's a different approach altogether. But when we are reading these writers for NET examination, so you have T.S. Eliot as a critic, you have a T.S. Eliot as a dramatist, and you also have T.S. Eliot as a poet. Very famous, you might have read the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. But this is not the one poem. There are so many others that you have to cover for your NET examination, right? So beginning from Renaissance, which is known as the golden period of you know, English poetry. So it doesn't mean that we don't have poetry before that. We do have, right? We have, for example, you know, Chaucer writing in heroic couplet for the very first time. Chaucer writing rhyme poems in rhyme royal. Chaucer writing poems in Ottawa. You know, later on we'll find you know, Petrarch started this, and then we have Thomas Wett and others started writing in Ottawa Rima. So what are these things? The prosody part, right? Rhyme, meter and all, that is also associated with poetry. So it's just not lines from the text, but also the meter, the stanza form, the rhythm associated with it, who wrote what kind of poetry. Like for example, if you know Hopkins, what is sprung rhythm, right? What is in stress, what is in scape. So things associated with poetry along with the lines of poetry and the writers who are writing it. That is also a part of it. You'll find questions related to it. You'll find paragraphs, for example. If you'll you know, start this practice, you'll find the comprehension part which is there in your syllabus will become a little easier, because you'll be able to understand the connotative meaning. So there are two parts, the denotative and as well as the decorative meaning. So when they'll ask you poems in comprehension, they will not be looking for the, for the literal meaning as such. So in that aspect, if you'll read poems, you'll try to analyze, critical reading is there. So if you'll do that, you'll be able to understand what kind of questions they're going to ask in your examination. So that is there, when we think of Renaissance poetry, we have Shakespeare, we have Spencer, we have Sidney. There are so many minor writers as well. Genres, came into existence. For example, sonnet, it started there. Sonnet sequence started there. There is ode, there is lyric, and so many other forms of poetry, including, for example, recent developments. We have limerick. They have asked one question related to limerick in your examination. There is haiku and so many others, right? So 3-line poem, 4-line poem, 6-line poems, 14-line poems, and then epics. So we have a range of genres within poetry that we have to cover alongside in every year. So when we think of metaphysical poetry, when we think of Renaissance poetry, romantic poetry, modern poetry, we are not only confined with British literature, but most of the times we think in that way, but we have Indian literature as well, beginning from 16th century. I will be talking about that as well. That is also part of poetry. So not just British literature, but beyond that we have so much to cover. Now, the third unit, as mentioned in the syllabus part, we have fiction and short story. So fiction can be anything. Novels can be a part of it. So till 16th century we find dramas into, so many dramas were written by writers, but with the 18th century onwards we find there is a beginning of writing a novella. क्यों हुआ ऐसा? It is because there was a demand, there has something happened, the role of cheap printing as well as the industrialization as well as the demand for middle class representation. There's so many things happening, and that is how novel came into being in 18th century. So 4 pillars of novel. Richardson is there, Fielding is there, Sterne is there, Smollett is there, and you'll find that is how it began. There is a trajectory from there to 19th century, from 19th century to 20th century, from 20th century to even till today. You have so many writers writing novels. How they are, basically their developments, picaresque novel, epistolary novel, gothic novel, development is as such, variations in such, and novella. There is one question that they have asked recently, 6 words novel. So what is 6 words novel? This is a recent development that you will find, right? So from 18th century to today, there are so many writers who are writing novels, different types of novels. For example, if I may have talked about in recent videos as well, there is a novel called Temporary People by Deepak Unnikrishnan. So it's written, the subtitle is a novel, but it's actually a short story collection. There are 28 short stories within it. So new developments are also taking place, and they are asking questions from there as well. So novels, modern novels simply, it does not only confine with modern literature. So novels written in 20th century, that is not that is one thing, but there are more than that they will be asking in your examination. Short stories is there, very very important, because most of the times what we do when you look at the syllabus of the very famous universities in India, including DU and BHU, you will find this section is very much invisible in the mainstream literature. So they will be teaching you novels, they will be teaching you poetries, they will be teaching you dramas, but most of the times it is elective to read some short stories, and that is why it's very important. If you'll see the question paper, they have asked questions related to that. For one side there will be characters from the text, or for example the themes. So how one writer is writing, what kind of writings, right? Even in India, for example, you'll find so many writers writing short stories, and there is a specific theme that you can associate it with it. Vijay Tendulkar writing mostly related to power dynamics, right? And other such concepts. So mainly when we think about it, we have American writers there. Down the line we have Edgar Allan Poe, we have Nathan Hawthorne, we have Catherine Mansfield, but it's not only them, right? There's so many others. So when you read V.S. Naipaul, for that matter, last to last year they have asked one short story collection of V.S. Naipaul. So when you will see the the title of it, it will look like a travelogue to you, right? Something related to world. I'm forgetting the title of the text. So when you'll see the text, when you'll see the name, you'll find that it might be a travelogue. Travelogue was also there as an example, but that was basically a collection of short stories. So even the mainstream writers that you read, they have also written collections of short story that we do not read in general, but they're asking in your examination. So that is also there, you have to remember. Now another unit is non-fictional prose, another very I can say कि बहुत सारे लोग इसको छोड़ देते हैं, but it's again very important. Why important? Because you read, for example, Bacon, you read Lamb, so many essays of studies, of travel, of death, of other places. I can name you so many texts by Bacon. But you know, Milton has also written short essays. For example, Milton has written about religion. Milton has written about there is a text called Of Education. So when you will see the title of it, Of Education for that matter, you will find that you'll think that it is written by Bacon, because that is how Bacon situate his titles, but it is by Milton. So when we think about Milton, we think about poetries. We never read him as as a story writer, as an essay writer. So that is one aspect that we have to cover. Other than that, the questions that they will ask, they may not ask direct questions from there. I remember one from Montaigne that is related. There was one story that was related to Brazil, and they have given the phrase related to it. There was one explanation in 1 or 2 lines, and then they have asked about the writer. So if you know how they are writing, not just what they are writing, but their writing style is important. You might be knowing about the aphoristic style of Bacon, or the explanatory style, how he was writing, Lamb was writing about the city life during the Romanticism, right? So Romanticism, you'll find poetry writers writing about the nature, writing about the urban landscape. Lamb, he was writing about the city in his short stories. So that is another aspect, very interesting, and that is how we will be looking at essays from the very beginning to the contemporary writers, right? Montaigne, again very important. Bacon, father of essays, father of English essays, father of modern essays. So much is there in essays in British literature as well as in other nations. One thing I'll also mention about, for example, Johnson has talked about the definition of essays. There will be so many questions based on definition of poetry, definition of drama, definition of essays, short stories. बहुत सारे जो mainstream writers हैं, they have said something about it, and they're asking questions in matching related to that as well, right? So we have essays there, we have modern writers. For example, Orwell, you know Orwell because of 1984, you know him because of Animal Farm, but he's written so many essays. This one is famous, Shooting an Elephant, you might be knowing about that, but other than that, there are others as well, like for example, there's one that I can think of at this moment related to Orwell. He has talked about how sports, the sporting kid, the name of the essay is The Sporting Kid, which is related to how we don't need unity and those kind of things in terms of sport, because now it has turned into a war. So contemporary notion, the role of nationalism in it. So that is how Orwell has situated his writings, his short stories there. So we think about Orwell, the first thing that comes into our mind is dystopian fiction. We can think of Animal Farm, we can think of 1984. If you have read more about him, you might be knowing about what does it mean to call a novel an Orwellian novel, right? So the kind of writing that he is writing, the way he is writing is also becomes important. Then there are so many autobiographies, there are speeches. Shivam sir has mentioned some of them in the previous video that you have received. But remember one more thing, when we think about units like feminism as such, so there are speeches related to it as well. I can think of Anti-Woman. If you remember, Sajana Truth has talked about in her writings. Then there are Watson, who has written a text on it. So we have lectures by another people, and then we have text on those lectures by another people. So getting it. So what is important to understand, that who has talked about it, who has given the lecture, then who has written it, and then their commentaries on it. For example, I can think of Adichie. There are very famous TED Talks available on YouTube. Go and search. For example, Everyone Can Be a Feminist is one of them, and it's available on YouTube. I think the most liked video till now of the TED Talk. You can watch it later, and you'll find the text. She has written novels, she has written short stories, and they're asking in your examination. South African, Nigerian writers, right? So it's not only subjected to British. That is what I am trying to mention here. That the another unit is language, basic concept, theories, and pedagogies. Shivam sir has mentioned in the class in the last video that it is a very undermined unit. So what actually means by language acquisition theories, right? So you might be knowing, for example, Chomsky, right? There are other writers as well. Chomsky is famous, but there is a theory related to general semantics. What is general semantics, you have to understand, and then what are the theories related to general semantics. So there is one aspect of it which says how our mind, is somehow controlled by language. So language, and how then in the 20th century we cannot control about we cannot rely upon language as well, things that are happening. So how it associates with it, so many theories associated to it. It should not be asked in the literature examination, but it is there, and they're asking 2-3 questions related to it every year, so we cannot escape it. It's very important unit from that aspect. General semantics, semology, they may not ask you semology part as such, that transcription, other things, but there are theories. The theoretical framework is there. You should be knowing who came up with what theory, what it associates with. There were questions related to it, right? For example, they have asked to select 2 texts out of 5 related to Chomsky. They have also asked you to arrange them in a chronological order. So in that depth they are going, so you have to cover all these aspects as well, right? Don't think of that you'll come up with 100 famous writers of British literature, you'll remember their chronology, and that is how you are done with the paper. That is not a good approach. When you are appearing for JRF, when you're going JRF, there should be a different approach altogether. Okay, now English in India. English was introduced in India in 1600 when East India Company came into existence in India, and then the pre-independence part, the post-independence part, and even today. So Shashi Tharoor is still writing, right? There was one question related to him the examination. Now so many retellings of Ramayanas is basically coming into existence. So not only the mainstream part, for example, beginning from Toru Datta to today, that is one approach that you cover when you read literature. You have 3 books, right? You have 3 books in India which are talking about English in India. For example, Naik is there, Iyengar is there, Malhotra is there. Last year I remember there were 3 questions directly asked from the Malhotra text. So the introduction part of all these texts will introduce you what is the status of English in India, and then the language part of it, what is Pidgin, what is cliche, and all those factors. So English is used as Pidgin in India. So what is Pidgin at first part, and then the pre-independence writers, what were their issues? For example, if you think of Mulk Rajanand, if you can think of Raja Rao, if you can think of the writers writing before they started their career before independence, they have very different things to talk about. So when you think about it, 19th century novels, you have social novels there. You read Dickens, for example, right? You read Thackeray there. Similarly, we have Indian English writers, and they are also talking about the same things. If you think of, for example, Kantapura, social novel, right? You think of Untouchable, social issues. For example, The Guide, The Bachelor Party, what they were basically talking about. When you read Dickens, you read about the issues of school. When you read R.K. Narayan, you read the same. When you read about for example, when you read Thackeray, you read about the problems associated with the exile, the Newgate novel series that you have. When you read, for example, Kantapura, you read about the Indian independence issues. When you read, for example, Swami and Friends, it is about schools, the issue of headmaster, the teaching issues. So it's there in India as well, right? Then after the post-independence, how we move slowly from the social aspect to the individual aspect. For example, you read in Anita Desai, so how the things change. Then 1970s, 1980s onwards, you have Salman Rushdie. So the change that is taking place, and how Indian writers have incorporated this in India. So that is one thing, but only Indian writing in English is not there. They are asking questions from Hindi literature, mainstream Hindi literature. For example, Harishchandra, right? So Jashankar Prasad. So you might be knowing them if you belong to UP and Bihar, but if you are not from UP and Bihar, you might not be knowing about these writers. But they are asking questions in your examination. Poetry, drama, and other such aspects as well. So Indian drama, you have for example, the classical Indian drama, the modern Indian drama. In between, you have so many writers. Tale Danda, you might be knowing that. Vijay Tendulkar is there. Mohan Rakesh is there in Hindi drama, Bengali drama. So many units in such, and they have to cover all of it in our in this aspect. So much is there. Sir has already talked about it, so I will not explain a little bit because it's just an introductory video. But that kind of questions you can expect in your examination. Okay, now yes, another unit is cultural studies. It should be after literary theory, but sir has already mentioned what you have to cover in cultural studies. How this unit is important, because you may get 9 out of 10 if you have covered it completely. So when you read literary theory, you have, start from structuralism, for example formalism. So from formalism to new criticism to structuralism to post structuralism, reader response theory, so on and so forth. There's a chronology and you have to follow that in order to understand, because everything is related to, every writer, every concept is related to one another. So if you don't know what Chaucer has said, there is no point reading Derrida. If you don't know what is Derrida is mentioning in his writing, there is no point of reading the Yale critics. So everything is related to each other, every writer is related to each other, and that is something that is important. So chronology you have to follow. 1964 you have BCC, Birmingham Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies. That is how the beginning of cultural studies, you can locate it. But if you think of 19th century, you have Matthew Arnold writing Culture and Society, Culture and Anarchy, that inspired Raymond Williams to write Culture and Society. So how it is related to literature, then culture, anything can be a part of culture studies. There is one text called Thick Description. If you read that text, you will find how anything can be considered as culture and what aspect that we have to cover for examination. So in very general, what we can do to to actually prepare for this unit is to look at it the way we look at the mainstream British literature. So they are writers, they are cultural studies theorists, the concepts, the texts that they have written, how we can relate it to the literature. For example, we have Paul Gilroy, Black Atlantic. You might be knowing about this writer if you have read few texts related to cultural studies. So he is talking about the black identity. Fanon. So many other black writers writing about the black identities. But when you will read Paul Gilroy's Black Atlantic, you will find how Nigerian is, black identity is different from the African identity, and then how African identity is different from the American identity. For example, in that Indian context, there is a concept called identity crisis. So they are text, right? And then there is also, for example, if you know Brick Lane by Monica Ali, a very important text that we cover for the identity crisis. A 17-year-old girl married to a 35-year-old guy, and then they are also shifted to another place in America. So that aspect is there that we can locate through the writers of cultural studies. So we have theories related to Raymond Williams, Stuart Hall, and Frankfurt School, Yale critics, and there's so many others I can name at this moment, but I'll not be doing that because that is something that we'll be covering in the class. What is important now to understand, in last year they have asked about the chronology of the text related to Raymond Williams. So this is how they are asking questions. Not only what they have written, what that idea is about, how we can apply it to literature, but also their chronologies as well. That is also a part of the syllabus. So this is, we'll be covering in depth. Very important unit, I'm telling you, because there are so many questions that they are asking from this unit in recent years. Literary criticism. This is one unit that you might be acquainted a lot with, because you have read from Plato to T.S. Eliot. There is a rich history of literary criticism. I can name some of them for you. It starts with Plato, there is Aristotle, then you enter into the Roman criticism, there is Longinus, there is Horace, there is Virgil, then you enter into the Renaissance period, there is Philip Sidney, then you enter into the Jacobean period, you have Ben Jonson, you enter into the neoclassical period from 1660 to 1785, you have Dryden there, you have Pope there, you have Samuel Johnson there, you enter into the Romanticism, you have Wordsworth, you have Coleridge, you have Keats, you have Shelley there, then you enter into the Victorian period, you have Matthew Arnold there, then you enter into the modern period, you have T.S. Eliot, I.A. Richards, and F.R. Lewis. This is a syllabus of literary criticism. All these writers, you might be knowing them as a poet, as a dramatist, but they are also important as a critic. So there are texts that are related to it, right? You might be knowing some of them. For example, if you know Aristotle, you might be knowing poetics, but you may not know rhetoric, what he has said in the rhetoric. For example, if you know Plato, you might be knowing about Republic, but there are texts related to him, like Phaedrus is there, right? And then there are commentaries on them. Derrida has written a text called On Plato's Pharmacy, where he has talked about the role of the difference between speech and writing. When you will read structuralism and post-structuralism, you will find there's a difference, right? What is important? Speech is important or the writing is important? There's a whole argument that is related to it, and Derrida will go back in history and write an essay on Plato's Pharmacy, and he'll be talking about that difference. So not only what they have talked about, the contemporary notion of them, how critics are incorporating their ideas in their writings is something that is also important. So their theories, their essays are important, but again, how they are implemented by the cultural studies writers, how they are talking about all those things is also something that is important. Now I'll talk about the theory part. Sir has already mentioned how it's not only post World War II, but it is pre World War as well. World War One, World War Two. It's all started from formalism. You have Slawski there. You have Jacobson there. So many other Ian Terracon and other writers talking about folk tales, talking about how we should approach close reading as such within formalism as well as in new criticism. In new criticism, you have American new criticism as well as British new criticism. Their writers, their theories, what are the concepts that they're coming with. For example, tension by Ellen Tate, texture by Ransom, right? T.S. Eliot's essays, I.A. Richards' essays, practical criticism, close reading, so much that is related to formalism and new criticism. Then how you can associate it with the structuralism, theorists associated with the structuralism, their concept associated with structuralism, how structuralism is different from post-structuralism in 1960s, and then 1950s reader response theories, 1970s new historicism. So from the very beginning, from formalism to post-structuralism, you have so many theories within it. How the writers are there, how they are talking about it is something that is important. Very interestingly, from last 2-3 years, they are asking questions of chronology from the famous theorist. Like if you'll see the paper of last year, both the papers, you'll find there's one related to Foucault. So they have asked about the chronology of Foucault's text, and not only the mainstream, the main important text, but the minor text by Foucault. So you might be knowing what kind of approach that we need in order to incorporate all these things. Everything is available. You have the content available everywhere, on YouTube, on social media or any other aspect. But what to take, how to read them is something that will be teaching you, right? So this is all there. Feminism, eco-criticism, eco-feminism is there, postmodernism, modernism, literary theory, literary criticism, all such aspect will be covering in our classes. That is what I wanted to explain in this video. If you are watching this video and if you haven't watched the video that is already available by Shivam sir, please do watch that video and then come to it, okay? And this is it, and then we'll be coming with previous year question paper in our next video. Thank you.